Hi and welcome. My name is Malika Mahmoud. I'm a DJ and music curator based here in Copenhagen. My pronouns is she, her, and I'll be moderating but also participating in today's KFP conversation. The topic of the conversation being how to book and host female and non-binary music artists. It's not new information to any of us that the music industry has been extremely cis-male dominated. But today there is an increased focus on how to make the industry more gender inclusive and more equal. Actors across the whole industry is starting to make these initiatives on how to be more gender inclusive. For bookers and promoters, they're starting to have a focus on how to book more gender equal lineups, booking both cis-male, cis-women, and gender minorities. But how does that work in practice for us female and non-binary artists when we're being booked into these spaces? It can feel like there is some internal structures that these venues and festivals and bookers and promoters tend to forget when they are aiming only on booking equal lineups. Equality within a lineup is only one step towards making bookings more gender inclusive. And there seems to be some internal structures that are still very cis-male dominated and gender discriminating. We want to use this conversation today to make the awareness of some of these internal structures that we female and non-binary artists are met by. And to have this conversation, I've invited you two, James Lotion and Varnrable. I'm so excited to have you both here and to have this conversation with you. It would be amazing if you could start with presenting yourself.
Yes, my name is Camilla. I am a producer and a singer-songwriter. I'm from Norway, but I'm based in Copenhagen. I mainly make music under my solo project called Vulnerable, but I also produce and sing with or for other artists.
Nice. And you?
Yeah, my name is James Lotion. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a DJ, and I'm also part of Sweat, which is a queer and trans DJ and party collective. And we host parties that are focusing on queer and trans artists. We want to uplift them, and we also want to create more safer and more inclusive dance floors for LGBT plus ravers.
Nice. Thank you so much for participating. We are here not as experts, but because we are actors within the industry and within the Copenhagen scene with some knowledge and experience about this field, and we know how it feels to be booked, being and having the gender that we have. It's important to say as well, we're not speaking on behalf of everyone, we're just speaking on behalf of ourselves, but I'm sure that there'll be some non-binary and female artists out there who can relate to what we're speaking about today, and hopefully this conversation will be insightful for bookers and promoters and everyone involved in the industry. But first of all, I want to start with these internal structures that I'm put into words just before. Do you recognize some of these structures happening when you're out playing?
Yes. The first thing that came to my mind was an experience where I was supporting another artist, and then I brought my friend who was gonna play guitar on my show, and then we went for the sound check, and then the sound engineer only talked with my male friend about how the setup was gonna be, how the sound was gonna be. And then it was my performance.
You were the main artist.
I was the main artist. So it's, you're being kind of put off balance. Mm-hmm. And then it just continued. And then I tried to fill the space. And then it didn't work. So it ended up, I had to kind of vocalize it. Mm-hmm. And then I had to use a lot of my energy on kind of claiming that space. Mm-hmm. And after the sound, after we had the sound test, then I had to deal with those feelings and the energy, and that's not ideal when right before you're going to have a performance.
Yeah. Do you feel like that affected your performance?
Then I just had to work. You have to kind of go and then deal with that energy. So it didn't necessarily affect my performance, but it just drained me. So yeah, maybe it affected my performance actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you just have to kind of, because it's happened a lot. So that's why I don't think it affected me. But it's kind of, it builds up from time to time. So it's kind of, in general, affecting your energy and how you feel about going to certain venues. Sometimes you just know this is going to be uncomfortable. And then you just work from there.
Yeah, because you have to.
Yeah.
Have you experienced this as well? Or do
Yeah, I think that often there seems to be like a disconnect between the people that do the bookings and then the people who are in the venue. So sometimes you get booked for an event and you get the feeling that the booker has an idea of who you are, what you stand for, and then when you show up at the event, there's someone who it's like, oh, you're playing, well, here's all your stuff, and then maybe the first thing that happens is that you get misgendered. That has happened a lot to me, and that is like uncomfortable when you just come in somewhere and you immediately have to someone goes over your boundaries, or you just have the feeling that they don't understand what you're about. And then I think also the challenge is that then you have to make a decision, like, am I going to stand up for myself and say something about it, and then maybe risk that people respond badly to it. And I think that's the challenge when you're working in an industry where a lot is based on networking and making friends with people and making sure people like you and that you get booked again. And when you have to constantly fight your way through, it's really hard. And sometimes you have to just let things happen that you don't feel comfortable with because you don't feel like you have the power to say something.
But that's fucked up. But that is the reality that we're met with. And I think that's also one thing with, all this industry, I would almost say trend about being gender inclusive and wanting to book lineup containing cis-male, cis-female, gender minorities, that they forget how to actually do it. They're more focused on the actual aim. So yeah, in my opinion as well, I think there's some ways that could make it more gender inclusive by actually knowing who they book, so you won't be misgendered when you walk in. And that leads to my next question. Do you have any solutions or dreams on how it would be to be booked at a place that is gender inclusive? How could these bookers and promoters get better at actually making you feel more included and more welcome so you can be creatively free when you're performing?
I think, as you said, that, or you said, that they need to have knowledge about who is playing. So, and maybe, have a bit more knowledge about how it affects people when they're being met at a venue. And it's a full performance, and if you want the best performance, you want the person or people to be comfortable. But I also think it's you need to kind of remember that your feelings are valid, because in that space it could be very lonely if you're the only one. And from that place, you can also draw a lot of power and knowledge that you can use for further bookings, and just to kind of create a safe space around yourself.
Yeah, I think what's really important is that often these events think that the fact that they are booking more inclusive is enough and then they're done. But actually, it's only step one. So I think many of these places, they forget that when you book people that are gender minorities, trans people, that there is a responsibility that comes with it and that you have to follow through from A to Z. And right now I have the feeling, or my experience is that they stop with A, maybe go to B, and that's it. I feel like when you book artists, you need to make sure that also the team that's actually working in the night is like aware of like who's playing, like, so you have conversations with them and say like, okay, you cannot just assume people's pronoun. You need to like set a rule that you ask people about their pronoun, or you just approach people in a general way, or and that the people in the bar and also in the social media, what you're doing, that you actually include that, because I think that the fact that many people have this bad experience also is a reflection of who is actually dominating the clubs and the technicians and the bar people. And it's like, it's obviously that there's not many people that have our experience working in these places, because then these situations won't happen. So I think these places also need to be critical towards themselves and like evaluate, like, so who's actually working here? Like, are we only like using these bookings to make ourselves look more inclusive, but all people that work here are like white cis-men, or like, you know, who's doing the cleaning in your venue? You need to be more critical towards yourself, so it doesn't become like, oh, you know, let's use these artists so that we look better, because obviously then these things happen. And it's
and if they're just doing it to be more gender inclusive, it can feel like they're tokenizing us and using us for diversity clout. At least that's how I feel sometimes when being booked. And sometimes people don't even know what I'm playing, but they're booking me. And I know, okay, so why are you booking me? I'll ask. And that'll be one of my solutions to make sure that I'll be playing at a place where they know what kind of artist I am playing out as a DJ.
Yeah.
And and I think for me, that's also one thing, that you can't just book and go to, exactly as you're saying, to step A. You need to think of like, how do you want to get to step A? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think also like the reason why I just caught myself like saying that you need to protect your energy and all that stuff. And it's also because I'm also like, being a female of color, it's also very usual to be in that lonely space. But ideally it would be not my job at all.
Exactly.
You know, like I'm here to play, and like that's the job. So I think also that's a process you have to also go through, that you're so used to kind of taking that responsibility just to make it easier for everyone, but it's not really.
No, it's not our responsibility, but it's hard to not do it, because if you don't, then it's like, okay, how am I ever going to get booked, and how like am I going to get paid? We want to live off what we do. So I think that it's really important that all these bookers and promoters, they start to look and be critical about how they actually book and want to be gender inclusive as well.
Yeah. I also have one thing that I think is important, is that obviously, you know, there are so many female, trans, non-binary artists that really deserve to have a space to show what they can do, but also because, well, obviously they deserve it, but also there's, I think, a lot of people that want to see people on the stage that they can recognize themselves in and feel empowered and inspired by. And I think that, you know, when you book these kind of artists, then also the audience that comes is reflected in that. So like when I play, I notice that there's like trans people or non-binary people that come because they feel like, oh, I'm playing, so then this must be a safe space for me to come. And I think that that's also why it's so important that venues like think of it more in a holistic way, because obviously when these people come, I also feel very responsible for like making it a good experience for them. So if they show up at the door and the first thing that happens is that they get misgendered or treated in a way that's very uncomfortable, it just creates like a really bad vibe. And I think that sometimes with our collective sweat, we get asked to play at certain events and we actually just say no because we feel that this venue is not able to guarantee our audience to have a good experience. And we don't want to create a bad vibe and to have the people that come to our parties say like, okay, this was terrible, I'm never going to these parties again. And I think that many of these venues, they, as I like to call it, they create these queer traps or trans traps where they like just put up an event because they think it's hot and happening. And then actually they create a super unsafe environment for their guests because a lot of their regulars, they don't know who's coming. So I have known about a lot of experience of clubs who have like a queer night and then people being harassed and having homophobic and transphobic, racist stuff because their regulars, they're like, oh my God, who are all these people that are never here? They don't inform people how to like treat the people of that night, and it just creates like a super toxic and dangerous environment. So I think people need to be have to be critical about it sometimes about bookings or events.
But I guess that's also one way for you to navigate within that, to being able to say, okay, I'm going to say no, and Sweat, you're going to say no, to actually be a part of that lineup, because that's a way of you to navigating and to avoid being in such a situation. And I think what you said as well, with like having that knowledge and just be within yourself and empower yourself before you go on stage, is also a way for you to navigate within those very like gender discriminating structures we're met by. But do you have other like advice, or do you have other ways of navigating when you're playing out or when you're booking, when you're doing parties with Sweat?
Yeah, I think community. Try to connect with people that you can share your experience with, so you don't feel as lonely. Maybe there could be this kind of support. I don't know, some kind of place you can go to if you had something. I don't know. It's hard to like say like, oh, just have a community, because you can't just find a community. It
depends on where you are as well.
It needs to kind of come natural. But I guess for other people who maybe don't feel lonely or don't feel they are a part of something, there could be a place where you could, some people you could talk to, and maybe outside the venue.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you have any ideas on how we could take care of ourselves until the promoters and venues start being more gender inclusive as well?
Well, for me, like personally, that's why we started the collective that we have. So we are like several DJs in the collective, and we try to create like nights where we are all booked, or so we have more control of like what's happening in the night, and we like support each other with like, oh, this place is booking me, how much are they paying? Or, you have someone to kind of have some feedback from, where you can say, what do you think of this? Or like, what do you think I should do? Or do you have any tips on like how to communicate around this? And I think there are also some Facebook groups of that are for like female artists. So where I think I see that they're sometimes writing like sharing their experiences. But also I think that, as always, it should not be only our responsibility. It should be like the people who work in clubs, the people who have the power, they should stand up and say to their colleagues whenever they notice that someone says something that is sexist or transphobic or racist, to say like, hey, this is not okay. Club owners should also give their example to their staff, and like, this is how we treat our guests, and make sure to do this to make them feel safe.
Yeah,
I guess. Sorry. I guess also a more like practical thing you could do is kind of to write a manifest or some kind of text in your like a hospitality writer.
Right.
Yeah, you could write down kind of your manifest or what's important to you. That could kind of create like a good starting point. So, and also if you have experienced something uncomfortable, then you could always like go back to that, so you don't have to verbalize it.
Yeah, so it'll be like a contract actually.
Yeah. So I haven't done it myself. No. but I was like, I'm gonna do that now.
It's a good idea. You can say, please confirm you've read this and that you will share it with
share
your
it with them.
Also, because if they don't do it, then you have it on paper, like you promised when we made this booking or this agreement of me playing where I got booked. Then you have it on paper. This is what you should live up to. And I think another thing that I've been thinking about when it comes to like how you're being booked as well is how you're actually being booked through email sometimes. Like how they'll just write you in a way that they're just assuming that you're playing a certain kind of music, or that like the way and the vocabulary as well of how they're actually booking you within that email. Sometimes I get this, I got this email once from a cis-male, and he was like, oh yeah, I like your music. So he had heard my music, but we would really like you to play, if you could play a little warm music, like what the fuck is warm music? I don't know. And then he was like, and also, if you play, then the balance of the genders we're booking in the lineups will also be it'll be more balanced. And I'm like, okay, so then I'm here to solve your problem. I don't want to solve your problem when I'm the one that you're trying to like be gender inclusive for, you know? So again, that's this with step A and starting at one place. I think it's very important that they start at another place with stuff like, doing staff meetings, knowing who they're booking, all these things that we've been speaking about.
It's a challenge, sometimes also like a moral challenge, when you feel like, on the one hand, you obviously want to support the idea that they're like actively making a decision to book. But when you have the feeling that you're just being booked because you are a female or non-binary artist, it's also like, no, okay, so that's kind of the only thing they like me. I would be nice if I could book because I actually like my music. So do I then say no out of moral, or am I going to say yes because I also want to get exposure? It's like,
and I think the importance in that is also to speak with each other. So when we experience that playing one place, let's say in Copenhagen, that I tell the people that I might speak with, whom are also playing, I tell them like, okay, but this was my experience with this venue or this festival or this booker, so that we can kind of like, without organizing, totally still being like, okay, so if we all say no to this, then how are they going to actually be booking gender equal when all the ones that are actually females and non-binary artists don't want to play there? You know what I mean? Yeah, but I think there's a lot of work for the promoters and bookers yet to come. And I know this conversation became a lot of a conversation about how for us to be within those very gender discriminated and cis-male dominated structures. But I hope that this talk was insightful for some of you out there. And thank you so much for sharing your experiences and knowledge. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.